Hello, happy Monday, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining another Sneak Live. I'm your host, Brian Clark, and I have a question for you to start things off. Are you someone at your company or your team who's very security minded and oriented, and you really have been trying hard to instill that mindset in other folks around you, in your teammates, your other fellow developers, or just maybe DevOps professionals, maybe your leadership as well? Are you trying to do that type of thing? And if you are, and maybe you have been trying to do that and you're struggling a bit, you're in the right place because today's session, we're going to be talking about changing the culture around security at your company. And to help us learn more about that, someone who has a ton of experience doing it, is very excited to be discussing it, is none other than KC Thomas, who I'm going to join is a Snyk Ambassador and is going to introduce themselves right now. Hey, Casey.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
So I'm Casey. I work in election security. I deal with election printing equipment, machines, software, and all of that. And I am focused on all the security, but I also have a lot of decisions regarding culture and how to bring in security across our organization. So thank you for having me. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, we're very happy to have you here, and I'm happy to learn from that experience that you have, especially in such a important space in the industry, right? The elections and integrity and security and that type of stuff. Not going to get into the weeds of that, but imagine it's probably for something where that people deal with at lots of companies where you have legacy approaches to things or traditional ways of approaching things. It's difficult to make a shift in that mindset to get them to focus on newer and very important things. Not that security hasn't been important in the past, but like as technology has evolved and approaches to things like elections may have evolved, we need to be agile with that, right? So
Definitely. And there's also a lot of new regulations through Department of Homeland Security and a lot of executive orders that come straight through the White House that we have to keep up to date with. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to keep up to date with.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so to get us started though, what exact people might be wondering, maybe they haven't been thinking about this themselves. Maybe they haven't been that security champion at their company that's trying to instill this culture. What is security culture? How would you describe that to somebody that's uh, joining us from that perspective?
So security culture, it's pretty much a set of norms that are developed in a company, some values that you hold, attitudes, and assumptions that are made across the company. And a lot of those should be like-minded in a company in order to successfully succeed in developing the type of culture that you want. So for security, it's having everybody involved, knowing stuff like phishing or using MFA, things like that. That's more of the bottom line of security culture in an organization.
Okay, gotcha. And I imagine there's security is such a broad topic. When we're talking in today's focus is more around development, operations, that type of thing, right? Because I know you mentioned phishing. It still applies to those folks, but they may not be as heavily involved in putting things in place to help prevent it. Is that correct?
Um,
Or,
it's so being aware, everybody in an organization has to be aware of what can happen. If you're using a company email address, that could make your organization open to an attack. So knowing just the basics of security across like departments, doesn't matter whether it's just software development, everybody should be aware of these things. It's just a belief that should be held across the company, pretty much.
okay, gotcha. Yeah. All right, so we know what security culture is now. Let's say we have people that are bought in, that are on board with that type of thing. What's the first step? Where do they go to start broadening that perspective across their team and company?
I guess it really depends on which department you're in. A lot of it starts with IT, um, but then software development, if you're agile, I would hope that IT would be involved and you have a DevOps team or a DevOps specialist or any sort of DevOps operations that can help bridge to IT at least. Um, but it's very difficult to know if you aren't already a company that's security focused and aware. It could be difficult to navigate who you need to talk to about these things.
So where in that regard then, in your experience, what were some of the things that you found yourself having to do to figure that out?
Um, I first started with software development and I had to find out who do I have to talk to about certain policies or who do I talk to about knowing what our customers require in a product. There could be certain requirements that are at a higher level of federal regulations that we need to look at. And who are my contacts? Who, like, it really came down to that. It's like, who do I need to get this information from, and how are we going to implement this? And then how do we make sure that our developers get follow those regulations that our contract is requiring for these customers?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. In my experience, I've found that based in past roles when I was in software engineering more role or focused role, um, and this is just my limited experience. I don't know if this is the case anywhere. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Casey. Um, it, there tends to be in more larger established companies, you start isolating, breaking out different responsibilities, right? Maybe you have an IT team, maybe you have a DevOps team. In my experience, that DevOps team was some of the responsibilities that they had were around handling and managing pipelines for delivery pipelines for publishing the code that we as a team would development team would build and kind of hand over to them and say, this is ready to go kind of thing. And then we also had which is the security team. I would call them the security heads. And at the time, this is many years ago, at least from a developer perspective, I found that they would just go on what you were mentioning there before. They would have policies, and it was just like almost like a spreadsheet checklist. Like, are you in compliance with this? And it was just kind of handed over to us and me as a very green developer, especially at the time, I was just like, I don't know. Yes, like, and it's just taking it for face value. It sounds like I believe so, like to the best of my knowledge and ability. I think so. Yeah. So before diving deeper into maybe that experience and that relationship between the teams, what's been like the structure that you've seen, in your background and experience for companies? Is it similar structure? Is it, or they merged a lot together? Uh, what are your thoughts on that?
It's really dependent on the size. If you're enterprise, if you're a small company and you have just a small team of, say 25 to 50 developers, that's really small.
Mm.
Even 50 to 100 could be pretty small. But once you kind of get a little bit larger, I would assume, and most companies do have more structured, like you have your specific security team, you have a DevOps team, and it's all structured and everybody has their ways of working. But in a really small organization, it's hard to define those lines, and a lot of those roles don't seem to be separated,
Mm.
which does lead to a lot of problems. But there are still ways to work around it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can see that happening quite a bit. All right, so let's say again, somebody's on board, they're they're into the security culture, but they're trying to convince other folks around them. Maybe they found the right people to talk to. What would they do from there? How can they scale that out, let's say, beyond just maybe them or the immediate peers of their own? How can they start scaling this out to instill that culture?
If there isn't anything already in place to get everybody active and involved in learning, because constant learning and engagement and having it, you know, in the back of everybody's mind all the time, such as something simple as in locking your workstation when you walk away from your desk, things like that. It's if you don't have tools, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So, if like starting at the very, very base level, would be recommending how do we get educated? How do we get our employees educated on security? What sort of tools do we need? Do we need to educate them about phishing? Do we need to educate them on using MFA or something as simple as locking their computers?
Mm.
And then evaluating those tools and then bringing it to leadership to get those implemented, which of course is a little bit more harder than it's not as easy as it sounds, but that's the core starting point is those tools to educate users.
Well, so I know you laugh about that, but why is it more difficult to convince folks at that position about these things?
Um, so within the past couple of years, security has definitely been more of a forefront for the C level. And so they're aware. They're aware of ransomware, of having data stolen, having to pay lots of money. That's pretty much the level they have. It's a basic level of understanding, but they're not educated on what security folks would know. So being able to push the point across of why it is needed to that leadership level is difficult because it's expensive.
Mm.
And yeah, that expense is a lot of times not something that a company finds too much value in it unless it's happened to them,
So it's almost like
unfortunately.
they need to be impacted and hurt by something like this first to really get the ball rolling, uh, in that regard?
Sometimes that's how it will happen, but if you already have it at the forefront of your mind and you have it ingrained in the culture of this is important and we want this because we don't want to put ourselves at risk, so we think this would be a really high risk for us, so we're going to invest in it and we're going to invest in the tools to make sure our employees are going to be aware and know exactly what to do.
Yeah. You've mentioned tools quite a bit. What are some of these tools that, you've seen used to help in this regard?
Um, so for company wide, there's the phishing campaigns like Know Before. They also have great videos. We use them at my company, and I think it's great because you're able to pick and choose what type of security related education you want to give out to employees. And then you could deploy phishing campaigns. And if somebody fails a campaign, you're able to see those users and give them some extra education,
Mm.
or if needed you could see, okay, I see this user's behavior because behavior is important. And it's not like everything that happens that's to a company is malicious. A lot of it is just people don't know, they're not paying attention, they're not aware, and they end up doing the wrong thing. And it's because they just don't know sometimes. And of course, the software side, I mean, I feel pretty proud I was able to get Snyk involved on
Mm.
the software side because that really brought some more awareness and helped bridge a bit of the gap from security to development, because security has always been seen as burdensome and nobody wants to deal with their company's security person because they think they're the Department of Nope, but it's really not that way, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can definitely I've definitely had that feeling towards the security team in the past before, as my career has progressed over time. Um, but I also I think the one thing you talked about, not necessarily specifically with Sneak, but that part where you're bridging that gap between the security teams and the development teams. In my experience, that security team was very hesitant to educate the developers on these types of things, whether, be ways of hacking applications or phishing situations. They're very hesitant because I guess they're, at least what I could take from it, or I could assume from the situation, is they just didn't wanna provide those details, uh, as a concern that they might use, like, an employee that they're educating on this might use it against them internally. Is Have you found, and again, this was many years ago, so maybe things have changed significantly since then, but I'm curious your thoughts on this and what have you seen in this space when it comes to security teams trying to bridge that gap with development teams? Are they more willing to nowadays to educate developers on this type of stuff and therefore build that relationship that way? Or are they still a bit hesitant to share this insight of what hackers and techniques that they might use so that the developers can know what they're defending against?
That's that's actually a point of view that I really haven't thought about because I haven't really seen that.
Okay.
Most of what I face is they kind of look as at secure coding as extra work,
Mm,
and it I don't know w- really where that stems from, but a way to not have it seem like extra work is to start off having developers secure code.
mm,
And while they're in the coding process, make sure they're securing the code. And that's another thing where it has to come from top down. There needs to be that leadership support to tell developers that this is the way that things are done. And if there's not that support backing up the security team, then it most likely won't happen unless you have somebody who's already interested and wants to know about these things. But that's kind of just from my experience. But if if a security team is threatened that giving that information to somebody, then there's definitely something that's missing at that point, I think, that, has to be looked at. That's for sure.
yeah. I mean, I would imagine they would have things in place for that type of risk to help,
Mhm.
mitigate that situation, right? So,
Definitely, you would
to
think so.
yeah, and to me, it's like, as from a developer's perspective, how can you expect me as somebody that's super, new to that space at the time, but I was one of those people that you just described where I was eager to learn more about that, about the security aspects of things and secure programming. So I was actively engaging with the security team, um, but in general, I would say, like, how can you expect developers to, whether they're interested in it or not in application security, understand what it is they're defending against, or defend against something without understanding what it is that they need to defend against, right? And having that education, as you put it, right, is a great way to help bring that to light for a developer.
Yeah, and that cross-functional communication is probably the best way to get started, such as having open lines of communication with your security team or IT team to just be open for if somebody has a question about something, you should be there to answer it
Mm,
because that helps foster the relationship of where they don't see it so burdensome anymore. Where it's like, why do I have to, use TFA for this and MFA for this and why do I have to do that? And it won't seem like such a burden once they actually understand the reasons why. And if they have somebody to just be there to, hey, I just have a quick question about this, or I'm not really understanding why we have to fix this part of our code. Can you explain to me what this vulnerability means and kind of walk me through the back end part of it?
right. Yeah. I'll be honest with you, even though I know the importance of TFA, 2FA, or MFA, I'm still gonna complain about it because it can be a pain, you know what I mean? Like, it's like that extra step, like, "Alright, I logged in. Oh, I gotta do this extra step now." It's like it slows you down a little bit. It's a small little thing, like, I'm saying this jokingly. I understand the importance of it. I guess my point being, though, is I understand the importance of it still. I understand, sorry. My goodness. I understand the importance of it, but I still get annoyed with it,
I
you know?
I even I even feel the same way sometimes because, I have to log into something and I'm in a meeting trying to present something and then something else comes up and I'm like, "Oh my god, okay. hold on a second while
Right.
I do my password manager, need to authenticate on a second device for my password manager to do it on my computer. And I have to do like all these steps. But, at least I know that doing it that way, then, we're not putting ourselves at a greater risk that, I'm doing my part to protect the organization
Yeah.
and myself.
All right. On that note, I have to ask, do you feel that there is a brighter future for us when it comes to this authentication that will allow us not to have to deal with these challenges of authentication? What are your
Well,
thoughts on the future of that?
there's been a little actually more chatter about the whole passwordless kind of way to go. And, I'm a fan of biometrics. I personally use biometrics on my devices, and I make sure that I at least have it as an authentication method for password managers. But I definitely think it will get easier in the future as long as companies adapt. That's the big thing. You have to adapt with new technologies and understand the implications of what it's going to be doing and how to do it, and have people who know and help you in that process.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I'm going to pause here for a moment because I'd be remiss, being that this is a live stream. We don't engage with the folks that are kind enough to chat with us. So I do see some questions in the chat. I saw earlier DevSec Sunny over on Twitch asked if this will be recorded. Yes, it's being actively recorded right now on YouTube in particular. So as soon as we're done here, the recording will be available up on the Snyk Security Snyk SEC YouTube channel. So you'll be able to watch that back in its entirety. And we usually turn these into standalone videos on top of that. That's a little bit more highlight reel. So if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for setting me up for that, DevSec Sunny. Sean '08, a buddy of mine I see lurking, says lurking there, but also mentions the fun of sending an email or Slack message on an unlocked computer saying they are bringing in some sort of food for everyone tomorrow. There you go. Mr. 4X, thank you for joining as well. And I'm questioning the part that Brian talks about. You got dev teams basically knowing basic security. When you talk about development security, it's more a list, like based on the OWASP or known problems, but devs don't know how to do secure development. I'm guessing that they're just sharing their experience in that regard. What else did they say here really quick? Just reading through the chat a bit. That Mr. Fox agrees that the security team tends to be the nope team. So another +1 to that part, unfortunately. And then Mike Chamberlain, thank you for joining as well. I'm a huge fan of passwordless logins. From the perspective of trying to hack those types of logins, it's significantly harder. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that was the case. Do you find that as well, Casey? Like, there's certain types of authentication mechanisms that, especially with the latest development of like passwordless, that are proving to be more challenging for potential malicious actors.
There's definitely been a lot of research being done on that. I myself, I haven't been getting too much into it. I've a lot of other focus areas where I'm trying to work with what we have and how to improve that process, because introducing that sort of technology right now is, I know, something I won't be able to introduce and have succeed in my organization. But, of course, like watching the studies and the research being done currently, it does look like a better solution in the long run once companies can actually start adopting it, and we understand more about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like it. It makes it simpler, although it does add,
Mhm.
like, for a user experience, the flow. I mean, it's very similar to multi-factor authentication, right? It just adds an extra step that can be a bit. It just breaks up the flow of things, right? You're focused on, like, let's say a browser, you're logging in, and now you got to go to something completely different, right? That context switch can be costly to us as humans in general, to distract us in a way, right? So there is something to consider with that as well, I think, too. But it always feels like, from a development perspective, there's a balancing act between security and the risks that are there, and then the overall user experience too. And have you found, actually speaking on that, have you found with the development teams you might be working with that they will push back on certain things, and the security team, you and the security team um, are more lenient to certain things? Like, you'll be like, "Okay, you know what? We don't need to be as strict about this particular policy," but and so forth? What's been the experience there?
Um, unfortunately, I get so much pushback, but I'm just that type of person who's always like, "Well, why would you be pushing back on this? Help me understand what your needs are so I could find a place where we could meet in the middle." Because there are still certain things that developers have that are different than me, but I want to understand that. And I want to help reach a point where we're able to have them feel like they can freely develop, but also remain secure at the same time. um it's just really having that communication, which is so important.
Yeah. I feel like just generally in life, communication is the core of a lot of solving a lot of problems, let alone
It
security,
is.
right?
And cross-functional communication between teams such as security and development, IT, anybody, working anywhere in software development, having communication across every department that's involved is important. And a lot of that doesn't seem to exist, which makes things harder for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And the other thought I was having with all this too, in terms of like pushback from development teams, oftentimes, and again, I'm kind of speaking from my own experience, but and also talking with other developers out in the wild. Um, we all realize to some level or degree that security is important as developers, and we should factor that into our work. However, it can be challenging, and I think the answer to this leads you might have already answered this, but just to go through it anyway. The challenge can be sometimes that you're graded, so to speak, or you're measured your performance based on you delivering as a developer features and getting bugs fixed and whatnot, right? And when you're doing, let's say we're following agile methodologies and you're doing estimates, oftentimes that the security aspect of that, or even just general testing, which I would lump security kind of into that, doesn't get accounted for in the estimates, and your leadership doesn't necessarily allow for that space to account for that time that would be necessary so that I'm going to add this new feature as part of my task in this agile sprint. But the definition of done for that only includes that the feature is there in the app, and that's the end of the story, not whether or not it's adding any security implications as a result of that, right? So I guess maybe I'm just ranting here, but
No, like, I am
you know,
so glad that you mentioned this
okay, yeah.
because, I ran into that same exact problem. I'm like, "How am I going to deal with this? How am I gonna get developers to put this into their work?" Because I first started having to write my own product backlog items, but whether or not they got into a sprint, uh, that would just I would never know, and it was more work for me to do that. So I went a different way and started developing better relationships with product owners and product managers, and having it come from those product owners and the product manager to set those items for their developers. It was like, oh, kind of
Yeah,
moment,
yeah, yeah.
because now it's coming. This is an actual work item. It's not just a developer saying, "Hey, I see this." So it really started functioning the way it should at that point. So that was pretty nice. But it really should start from them, and product owners should be a security advocate.
Okay, yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's good to hear that, you had that success. What do you think is again, somebody that's maybe in the position of wanting to get to that same point, what's your advice to them? What's your guidance to them to get to that end result of a success where product owners, leadership are all on board with including that in a developer's life cycle?
It's really the first step is developing relationships across the line of with the people that you need to communicate with and understanding their needs, being able to communicate your needs, and finding who do you talk to express that these are important, and this is pretty much a point that these departments really need to get done. So say you have an issue about uh, just fixing a vulnerability in a product, how to address that. Like, you need to develop those relationships across the board, have that cross-functional communication, and hopefully it you can get to that point where it gets to leadership, where it gets to that senior leadership team, and you will have all the information that they want to see, because just talking to, say, a CEO is not going to do you any good. They need to see facts, figures, and all the information that's relative in their point of view. They
Yeah.
don't want to hear any sort of technical talk.
Yeah. Are there resources out there for folks like this, like you're saying, the data research and whatnot that can help drive that home for folks that are, motivated in that way and not just motivated by, the risk management factor?
There's so many free resources companies can use. There's free resources even through CISA, the Center for Internet Security, and all of that kind of stuff. There's free resources from OWASP. And you could even try to drive into doing a security champions program,
Ooh, okay.
which works across the board, not just software, but somebody in human resources could be a security champion. And then you could instill those values into your own organization. And because it is hard to understand different departments. But there's tons of free tools that you could use and find through CISA, CIS, NIST, even.
Mm.
And they're free. So that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best part of it.
If you don't mind, for folks that maybe are a little bit more beginner to this area, and this is the case in any part of the development industry or technology industry, what are some of those acronyms that you just, I know you mentioned CISA, you talked through that one, OWASP maybe, that one, and then NIST, if you can?
Yeah. OWASP was probably, I think it was Mr. 4X, I
Yes.
think that, yeah, had mentioned the OWASP. So OWASP is more of an application and internet related software development. They have their OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities that developers and people who are working with developers that are security related understand, because they know that, okay, these vulnerabilities are in our top 10 list, so they're important, and we have our list of stuff to look after. But then there's also NIST, which is also a set of guidelines, standards, kind of a way of working for security, where it's not, you have to do this, but this is the way you should do this, because this is the most secure way to do it. And they have a huge community that they redraft a lot of the guidelines. They are current, and lots of comments are being made all the time on these guidelines, such as how do you secure cloud infrastructure?
Mm.
How do you implement MFA into your organization? How do you do password logins? All of this, it's the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and they do everything. I mean, just from even nuclear technologies.
Oh,
So,
wow. And, when you said NIST, I wanna make sure I get the link correct before I share it with everybody in the chat. NIST.gov, is that the correct one that you're
yeah.
referring to? Okay, cool. Share that really quick.
Yeah, and these are all government organizations, which have become more involved with security, cybersecurity, throughout the past couple of years, which is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to see governments, trying to keep up with the times, because yeah. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds
Yeah.
on these things. Right? Definitely have had my opinions on that matter. Um,
Oh, I think we all do. But
yeah.
at least it's starting to look up, so
Yes, that's good. Um, you mentioned cloud infrastructures and things like that. With the the change in approach to deploying, running the infrastructure around applications, web applications, what it may be. How has cloud native type of I don't know what the word I'm blanking on the word here is, but like that's the buzzword nowadays, right? Everybody's going cloud native. How have you seen that play into this whole topic of changing the culture around security at a company? Has that factored in at all?
I think, yeah, it depends on where you are and if you have, a, executive level that, maintains knowledge and up to date with these kind of things because, uh, I don't I don't know about most people, but it kinda seems like, that level, in a company, they're not interested in these things, and
Mm,
so they're not going to be actively staying up to date with these technologies, so they rely on their experts, and a lot of those times, it's gonna be an expert that's in security, in IT, or a developer to help gather before they bring whatever information they need to that level because you can't rely on them knowing. You have to at least help them understand on a different level. So you have to work with multiple people to get the point across of what would that C level find valuable.
yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's fair, right? Because at that level, you have to delegate things. You can't know everything
It
necessarily,
costs
and so
lots of money too.
right.
So it's like they're if you're going to Google Cloud or AWS, it's like, well, how much is this gonna cost us? And they don't care about all the underlying stuff. They want to know why is this so expensive? And then you have to work out with your team and your cross-functional team to come up with all those metrics.
Gotcha. It never fails. I don't know if you heard that or you can kind of hear it in the background. Hopefully, it's not messing up the audio too much, but it never fails that when I'm streaming, a neighbor is mowing the lawn or something like that. So, the nature of live streaming, right? All right. So, the other thing I wanted to kind of touch upon and get your insight into is, there's just general challenges of trying to instill this culture in there, but there's probably some areas where folks will come across even more challenges than others. So, for instance, I'm not naive to the fact of my appearance that I look like a tech bro kind of thing, and maybe my experience in trying to instill this type of culture is gonna be a different type of path for me to get to that end result. What might it be for, or what would be your advice for people that are in other situations, right? Other backgrounds and experiences to help navigate this type of thing and come to the same result.
I really think that keeping it, just like with any other sort of career path, you need to stay up to date, stay in some sort of community. And so you're aware of current issues, how to solve them, new technologies. And I mean, technology is constantly changing. And I think it was Chris Krebs who said the United States is like kindergarten in cybersecurity when the rest of the world is way more advanced. So it's really important as long as you're knowledgeable and you stay up to date and you are actively involved in the field that I mean that's what's going to get you to succeed, showing that knowledge and sharing it with people. It's sharing the knowledge for one and showing that people you know what you're talking about, you have evidence to back you up, and that these are important issues that your company should really, really take a look at and listen to you because you're supposed to be the expert, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Make sure your voice is heard, and then I also love that you brought up the community aspect of that because to me that uh, especially the pandemic was like or has been the like a very eye-opening to me in the sense of how much I value community, and then being able to do that at least virtually, keep having that. Um, anyway, I could go off on a tangent about that, but I love that. That was the 2 things that you brought up there for that to help with it.
I mean, it really makes a difference, and I mean, I was even shocked that the pandemic really helped me develop my career because before, I mean, I was doing stuff I can't put on a resume,
Mhm.
but yet, how do I show a company that I know how to do these things, that I am actually probably the best person they could hire because I've done this. I know how to do it and I'm aware. And, if you're just doing it in your spare time for fun, I mean, how are you able to present that to a company and say, hire me because I'm the one who actually knows instead of this one old guy? I mean, how do you know that he knows? I could prove to you, but I mean, there's really no way of getting a lot of that across. It's more about passing, hey, well, let me tell you about this or that, the other thing. You have to really kind of explain a little bit too much, unfortunately,
Mm.
but um, there's
No,
a
you
lot
bring
of
up
opportunities.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point there because when it comes to, like, the security of stuff and just hacking in general, to, like, prove that, you kinda you're balancing on a fine line because and a lot of I don't know, I'm not familiar with all this, so maybe you can, give us some insight into this, but you kinda have to have, like, approval to hack a company, right? Like, they want to hire you
Mhm,
for so to speak to or whatever, contract you to do a test against them to see how secure they are. But if you don't do that and they don't wanna hire you know what I mean? Like, it's like a chicken and egg kinda situation of like, "Yeah, I know how to do this, but I can't really show
mhm.
you because that would be unlawful," right? Or whatever the situation would be. So what's your yeah,
Yeah.
how do you balance that? How do you, yeah, I mean, you
How
mentioned
how do you
explaining a lot.
start off
Right.
with a company who is, they're, like, strict on policies and procedures, and you're like, "Ugh, I can't mention my experience because, well, you wouldn't approve of that, but then how do I show you that I've had that experience?" kind of thing. It's like, well, you could at least say, "I know how to use these tools."
Mm,
Um, they're not gonna ask you, "Well, how did you use them specifically? Who did you use them on?" And I mean, I don't think, geez, at least as far as I know, I haven't had the, so are you a white hat or a
mhm.
black hat or a gray hat? Like, you don't hear that kind of stuff in interviews, as at least I hope that's not coming to how it's going to be. But even so, I mean, the great example was during the 2020 election, and they were getting the new cybersecurity uh, board going, and they
Mm,
were really going to press towards cybersecurity. On the White House website, it was so simple. All you had to do was go into your web browser, do an inspect on the code, and it said at the very bottom, if you can see this, we want you to work for us.
oh,
And that was the probably the best thing that I've ever seen happen for this industry, is because finally they're looking for people who know how to do it. And that's the what needs to change for companies to hire people that know these things,
yeah,
is they need to understand that just because somebody may have been doing it, whether or not malicious or whichever, they have the skills. You need these people, get them on your side, and that would help you succeed. But most of the time they're not going to be a risk
mm,
because just because they have the skills, give them the tools and the opportunity. And man, like, that's pretty much the greatest thing you could offer to anybody, because
yeah.
if
Well, it
it
makes
made me feel sad all the time thinking about, like, I loved doing it, it was a hobby of mine, but who's going to want somebody who's done that, or anything in that range. They want somebody with all the degrees and certifications, not the real
Yeah.
world experience.
And there seems like there are a lot of, again, I'm coming from that developer perspective and dabbling. I'm an enthusiast. I describe myself in application security to be specific, even, but dabble beyond that too. But I feel like there's so many certifications in the security space, and it sounds like, yeah, it's just interesting to me. Like, what's been? I guess, do you find that that is of I guess what I'm hearing from you rather is that that tends to be of the utmost importance, but things are shifting nowadays to where it's almost like, what we've seen with, like, big tech companies where they're saying to be a developer, you don't necessarily have to have a 4-year degree to become a developer anymore, right? Is it kinda similar situation happening in the security space?
I think, well, just as long like past couple of years, it changed a little bit because of work from home, and as long as you show your work, pretty much. I mean, that was probably the greatest example I could say is
Yeah.
people were able to show their work that they were fit for the job, even if they didn't have a master's in computer science. I don't even have my bachelor's in computer science. I mean, I did political science and justice studies, and then went on to my master's for forensic psychology. However, though, forensic psychology is really important in cybersecurity, so I could
Yeah.
see how that kind of relates. But you don't need to have like it. It really there's a generation of people who have grown up teaching their parents to use computers. I mean, I know I was that teaching my mom how to turn the computer on and off, and then, all of the bulletin boards and all of the early stuff on. And this is like real technology that some people just knew,
Yeah.
and it's been ingrained in them. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
You know,
don't think it's a
it's
necessary requirement. I really don't. I think
I
it's
agree.
unfair for getting the real talent that companies want.
Yeah. Well, and then, I agree, and the other thought that comes to mind with that is, like, if you can't beat them, join them, kinda thing, right? So, like, if you're a company that needs people, you need to be more secure, you have a lot of risk involved with your space that you're working within, and you have somebody that's been known for attacking that type of industry or whatever it may be, maybe see if there's a way to convince them, get them on your side, right? And, yeah, I like that.
I
I like
think
that.
that's why a lot of companies use like stuff like Mr. 4X mentioned. HackerOne is a big
Mm,
one that
yep,
some companies will post bounties and stuff, but there is some industries that shouldn't be utilizing HackerOne.
mm,
So it's more beneficial for them to enlist um, people who have that real world experience, even though it may seem kind of unsightly, I guess. But as long as you have a good program in place for insider risk management, anything, I mean, I'm sure you will have probably some of the most devoted people that you'll ever find joining your company doing that, and the most knowledgeable.
yeah, and who doesn't want that on their team?
Exactly.
All right, so we're starting to get towards the end here, and I wanna make sure we cover everything that, you're hoping to convey as part of this topic, Casey. So, what else, did is there anything else that you wanted to share with people to help in this whole challenge around changing company culture when it comes to security?
Yeah, definitely. Culture seems to have been a large takeaway in, well, at least two surveys, Progress, and the 16th annual State of Agile. Um, those really focused on uh, the respondents saying culture is a huge barrier. And if you don't have basic culture that's clearly stated, those norms and those belief systems installed in your company, you won't be able to succeed because I can't really tell you every single thing that could happen because that's way too much. But it it's really when you wanna drill down the issue, a lot of it stems from that culture, and a lot of development stems from that culture. Having something that's they're free to communicate, they don't feel restrained, they don't feel like IT is just saying no, they don't feel like security is just saying no. They feel open to express ideas, develop what they need, and just be a part of something instead of so restricted, I guess. When you develop that, that's really what builds something that could make amazing things. I'm sure we could see what's gonna happen with Twitter now.
Mm,
um, that's gonna be a huge cultural shift for them. So what's gonna happen after that? That's I mean, you you could look at one specific thing that everybody sees like, okay, this isn't working anymore. People are leaving. Well, what really stems from that? Well, look further down and see who's making these things. What is the company like? What is it doing? How does it treat people? What do they believe in? Um, do they love what they do? I really, uh, it really stems a lot from culture across
yeah.
the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it spot on. The one thing that resonate or one of the things that resonated with me the most there is, having that space to feel comfortable to ask the questions, especially for again, coming from that developer perspective. I don't like we all I mean, in every industry, there's some factor of this, but especially gets discussed a lot in the development, community about imposter syndrome, right? And so to be asking questions around security to a security professional can be quite intimidating, to be honest with you. But again, like you said, if the culture is set up in the right way to make it less intimidating or not intimidating at all for developers to feel comfortable to have those discussions, ask those questions of like, why do I need to? What is this cross-site scripting thing? You know, why? Why? What is the problem there? I don't see that.
Yeah,
Can you connect the dots for me? Right?
exactly. People should be free to ask that because I really hate it because so many times there are great people who ask me these questions, but then they started off with, this may seem stupid, or this is a stupid question, but I'm like, that's not stupid. This isn't your job. You just want to know more about it so you could understand it better. So then you could do your job better. And that's what matters the most. And so don't say it's stupid because it's not. It really isn't. Like I mean, I don't understand why people feel that way, but it really is something that it's been a huge barrier for so many companies where IT and security has become this. I don't know why it's feared or
Yeah.
feels like you're just going to get rejected if you talk to somebody from those departments, but it's not. I mean, it really should be open and transparent, just like everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and to kind of round things off at the end here, well, one Lubos over on Twitch said, "I love nice stream. I love it." They also mentioned that, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Sorry if I'm not Lubos. I am studying cybersecurity, so this stream is shining some light into areas that occur in real life for them. So this is fantastic. It's awesome
Awesome.
to hear, right?
That's cool.
Yeah. So awesome stuff. Casey, I want to thank you so much for joining us here and helping provide that insight on this very important topic, very interesting topic to me. I learned quite a bit from it. I think a lot of folks are going to get a lot of value out of it that were here and watching the recording later. So thanks so much, Casey, and hope to have you on again
Thank
soon.
you. Yes, I hope so too. This was fun. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to take you off stage for a brief moment and then we'll start rounding things out, closing things out.
Cool.
See you.
Thanks.
All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in to another Snyk Live session. This is our special Snyk Ambassador show that we've been doing. And again, special thanks to Casey on being here and helping talk about this topic today. Hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you are watching over on YouTube, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you can see more of this type of content on the channel. And over on Twitch, be sure to drop a follow so that you can be noticed when we're live over on that platform as well. Thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are in the world. We'll see you next time. And if we don't, have a great holiday season. I don't know why I went like this, like I was giving you a high five. Peace out. Have a great holiday season. We'll see you next time. And yeah, stay safe out there. Stay secure. Go change that culture in your company. All right, do it. You got this. We believe in you. See ya.